Hey, this is Mike from the Run Testers, and in this video we're going to be talking about this watch. This is the Suunto Vertical. Now the Vertical is very much an outdoor centric watch, so think things like the Fenix 7, the Polar Grit X Pro, the Suunto Vertical 2, but like all other Suunto watches, it is able to track your runs, and there are some features that are going to appeal to runners here. Most notably being the kind of dual band GNS support, kind of bring it in line with other running watches. It's also got solar charging, it's got a flashlight on there, and it does now have the ability to view or kind of display full kind of topo maps as well. So what we're going to do is take you through the key really running focused highlights that we need to kind of outline here, get you into some kind of initial running kind of thoughts and experiences, and then give you our initial verdict on what we think about the Suunto Vertical as an option for runners. So before we get into design and the key running highlights, let's talk a little bit about the price. Now the Vertical sits at a price range of £545 up to £745. So it is not cheap, and it is definitely playing up against things like the Fenix 7, all the way up to the Fenix 7X, which is obviously the most expensive Fenix model. It's kind of sitting around the same price as the Suunto Vertical 2. It's more expensive than the Suunto 9 Peak and Peak Pro, and it is more expensive, or significantly more expensive, than the Polar Grit X Pro. Okay, so let's run down some key design highlights on the Suunto Vertical. The first thing to mention is that you're getting it in the option of either a stainless steel or a titanium bezel. The titanium bezel will cost more than the stainless steel version, so that's something to keep in mind. They both have a 49mm case, which is kind of a polymer case, and that will put it size-wise just above the Fenix 7, and also not quite as big as the Vertical 2 or the case on the Fenix 7X. You're getting 3 physical buttons. You are getting a 22mm removable strap as well, and it's one of those kind of easier straps to remove as well, which is always good to see. You're getting a 1.4-inch dot matrix display, so not an AMOLED display, but it is touchscreen, so you do have the ability to interact in some areas on the watch for some features. Other things to kind of mention, obviously you're now getting solar charging on the Suunto Vertical as well. That will boost the battery life in various different modes. I think Suuntos in general, you should see plus 30% in terms of the battery life improvements across the board. So there, ultimately you're getting a Suunto that already promises big battery life, and then you're getting that extra solar charging as well if you're in the right conditions. Waterproofing remains the same as previous Suunto watches as well, so if you want to shower and swim with it, you can do that too here. So that is the kind of key kind of design highlights on the Suunto Vertical. Okay, so let's get into the running smarts. And yes, obviously it is a multi-sports watch, but we're really going to focus on those running features that we get here on the Suunto Vertical. And pretty much everything you get on the Suunto 9 Peak and Peak Pro are here on the Vertical, with some pretty noticeable extras. First being, you're getting a kind of the dual band, dual frequency, multi-band mode that we're seeing in all the other kind of top end kind of outdoor running watches. And ultimately that is to give you an improved GPS performance and tracking performance when you are near kind of tall kind of buildings and kind of cities. If you're in kind of deep forested areas, that's what that feature is there for. You are also getting the ability to view and display topo maps on this watch. And that also brings Wi-Fi to kind of load those watches onto or load those maps onto the watch as well. So that, and I'll kind of get into how that kind of works later. Other features worth noting are you're getting wrist-based running power. You are getting kind of Strava live segments here now. You are getting kind of similar kind of training and recovery insights as well. You're getting kind of interval training features as well, and then you are getting all the kind of running modes that you'd expect to see on a Suunto watch and that we've seen on their most recent watches as well. So those kind of feel like the key new running features or running focus features that, you know, runners are going to find are going to appeal. Now we'll get into a little bit about the battery life, which I think is worth highlighting, and then we'll get into that run test and our initial verdict on the Suunto Vertical. And so we get into battery life, and Suunto's watches typically have delivered very big battery life, and with the Vertical, Suunto is trying to push things again. Now I've pulled out some kind of key battery kind of figures and compared them to what you would expect from kind of a Fenix 7, also the Suunto Vertical 2, which I think these, you know, those are the watches that kind of are the closest kind of comparisons to the Vertical. And if you look at some of the numbers, I think the key things that really stand out for me are the really kind of performances you're getting in terms of that kind of optimal GPS performance, the kind of all systems GPS performance. When you are tracking, the Suunto Vertical is promising on paper much bigger numbers, or bigger numbers, or the kind of numbers we're seeing on those kind of top end watches. Things like the Coros Vertix 2 has a huge kind of, you know, battery performance, and we're seeing that kind of similarly with the Suunto Vertical. I think kind of things like kind of smartwatch mode and watch mode and day-to-day mode, you're getting big battery life numbers there, kind of what we've seen with other watches. But I think it's the GPS performance, and when you're using the GPS, using those tracking features, you're seeing definitely some big gains in terms of some of the kind of cheaper Fenix models as opposed to the kind of more expensive Fenix models, kind of seeking parity with what we're seeing with the Coros Vertix 2. And then also you've got that solar charging. If you are in optimal conditions, and if you're, you know, out in the sun on a regular basis, a bit like with the Garmin watches, then you will see those numbers push. But I think ultimately you need to have that kind of regular exposure, or the right amount of exposure of the to the sun, to get those kind of best kind of solar kind of battery reserves out of the Suunto Vertical. But ultimately it's promising big battery life numbers. You know, this is what we were expecting. It's what we'd expect from an expensive top outdoor kind of centric watch, and that's what Suunto is promising with the Vertical overall. Okay, so into the run test, and I had a kind of long run planned in for the weekend, longest run I've done in about 5 months, basically because of injury. It was kind of 10 miles. I did 5 miles. I kind of stopped the tracking at that point and then kind of did the 5 miles back, basically. Pretty hot day, so it wasn't the nicest conditions to do my first longest run in months, but I got it done. I had the 4 and a 965 on my other wrist, and I had that paired to the Garmin HRM Pro Plus heart rate monitor chest strap. I also had that in multi-band mode as well to kind of test the GPS performance as well. Now, in terms of running with a watch in general, now obviously it is really kind of focused on being used kind of in those kind of more rugged outdoor environments and give you kind of something a little bit more durable and, you know, protected. You do notice it's on, you know, it's not a super light watch. I mean, that's not massively surprising. It's not as heavy as a kind of Fenix 7X or something like, or as bulky as the kind of Vertix 2, but I think, you know, it's kind of closest to probably something like the Fenix 7, maybe, you know, in terms of the weight and in terms of the feel. A screen visibility point of view outside, obviously you're not getting an AMOLED here, you're getting that kind of more traditional display technology. From a viewing angles point of view, it's absolutely fine for me on that front. In terms of the kind of core run tracking performance, as I said, I broke this run up. The first 5 miles, I was checking the kind of the route kind of on the kind of the mapping features. So to get those maps on, or to kind of follow routes on a map, you need to first upload or load that route or part of the map onto the watch. Now the way you do that, you have to do it on the Suunto app, and then you have to put the watch on a charger to kind of sync it over using the Wi-Fi. Now once you've done that, you can kind of go into the settings and show that you want to follow a particular route, and then you'll get the kind of mapping experience there. Now in terms of the mapping experience, you are definitely getting a bit, you know, an upgrade in terms of the breadcrumb navigation that you've had on Suunto's watches before, and you still have that here. Now you can see that terrain, it's now kind of more identifiable, but as I can kind of show on kind of some of the video here, that when you compare it to the 965 and the level of detail that you're getting in that mapping, it's definitely not quite there with the Garmin. It's probably something similar to what you get on the kind of Vertix 2, it's kind of mapping support, but ultimately it's definitely a step up in terms of what we've seen on Suunto's watches. And if you are kind of more outdoor routes, then you can get a better sense of your environment, but it just doesn't have that same level of detail if you are kind of running out on roads, I don't think, based on my kind of initial testing. Now in terms of that core run tracking performance, it wasn't perfect. The first part of the run, when I was kind of looking at that kind of, you know, the mapping and how it was kind of tracking the runs, it was definitely off from kind of where it was putting me on the map ultimately. And when I looked in that data post run, and I've looked in that kind of, I had this in the kind of optimal kind of GPS performance mode, you could see quite clearly, like in comparison to the Garmin watch, some clear differences in terms of how the routes were tracked. And it, you know, a relatively kind of straight kind of route, but there were some kind of corners and kind of running around near buildings as well, where it may affect the GPS performance, and I did see some drop off in terms of that on the Suunto Vertical. Now when it came to heart rate performance, it was generally okay. I think kind of average was maybe a little bit higher, but the max seemed to be about right compared to the heart rate monitor chest strap. Definitely one I'd like to see a little bit more testing with, but it seemed okay, but not anything too wildly out with what I got on the chest strap. So into the second part of my run, and I had the watch set in exactly the same kind of mode settings. I was using it exactly the same way. And then the kind of auto lap craziness kind of happened, and it was kind of clocking me kind of every second, or every few minutes. It was kind of auto lapping me. I hadn't turned anything on, and I didn't want to stop it because, you know, obviously I was kind of mid run. So I was hoping it would stop doing it. It didn't really stop doing that throughout the run, and then I was end up clocking up doing a hugely long run, which obviously wasn't reflective of that run that I did. So that, you know, starting to see some kind of issues here that I wasn't expecting to see. I think the other thing for me as well in general using the watch is that the software experience, I feel like it's better in places in terms of the navigation, and other places it's still a little bit sluggish. Things that we've kind of criticised Suunto before in the past, where I thought initially that maybe they had sorted these things out, and I was initially using those kind of menus are kind of swiping through, or, you know, going through, it felt relatively quick, but it doesn't take a lot to kind of see that it still has some kind of sluggish, kind of slow, laggy elements to it, whether it's in the mapping, whether it's kind of just going through the menu systems in general. It just feels a little bit unresponsive or slow to respond to touches and to buttons. So that in general is a bit disappointing. But yeah, that second part of the run, I don't really know what happened there. As I said, I had it set up in the same settings as I did on the first part of the run. The first part of the run, generally the running stats seemed okay, but as I said, that kind of GPS performance wasn't perfect, or didn't really match up to the level of accuracy I got on the Garmin Fenix 965. So I think overall in that kind of first run, I think there's some similar kind of traits from previous Suunto watches I've seen. I think, you know, it's great that the mapping is there. It's not as detailed as what you'll get from I would arguably say is the best kind of mapping support on a watch, which is on Garmin's. The pure running kind of features I think the dual frequency didn't absolutely blow me away in terms of that support. The heart rate monitoring was okay. But I'm seeing some similar things here that I'm not absolutely loving. Now, hopefully, maybe over time and a few more runs with it, maybe things will improve. But I definitely think it's felt like a little bit of a mixed bag on that first run. And obviously, I had some kind of weird things that happened as well in that time as well. So yeah, those are my kind of initial thoughts on the Suunto Vertical from a running point of view. I'll get a little bit into the battery life before getting into my initial verdict. So some initial thoughts on the battery life and what I've experienced so far in my first few days with the Vertical, and on that kind of 10-mile run with the two watches, with this and the Forerunner 965, I saw the Vertical drop by about 3%, whereas I saw the Forerunner 965 drop by about 6 to 7% as well. So definitely, you know, obviously these are very different watches, but in terms of using them in those kind of optimal modes and kind of, you know, using things like heart rate monitoring and mapping, you know, the battery life seemed to hold up pretty well, and it feels like a watch in GPS mode that it's gonna offer those kind of big kind of battery gains. And kind of day-to-day battery life now, what I decided to do was I decided to turn on kind of the sleep monitoring, which you have to do because it's out of the box, it's disabled. That included kind of turning on the blood oxygen kind of tracking as well, the continuous monitoring of that as well too. So since kind of having a kind of 100% over the weekend, I'm now into 3-4 days later, it's down to about 50, like less than 60% now. So obviously having those kind of more kind of richer monitoring features are really going to hit the kind of level of battery life you're going to get day to day. And obviously those big battery life numbers that Suunto is talking about in terms of like kind of watch mode, smartwatch mode, when you've got those kind of more intensive monitoring features on here, I don't think it's really going to hit those kind of numbers ultimately. But if you can live with those features, and most people will, it feels like this watch is going to go longer than that. And most importantly, I think that GPS performance, or the battery performance, it seems to hold up pretty well, or held up pretty well on that long run as well. So yeah, I feel like Suunto's promised some big battery numbers here. I think depending on what you're using on a day-to-day basis, and crucially, it seems from that kind of GPS kind of tracking and using those kind of richer GPS features support you're getting here, it seems like it's not going to massively hit the battery life, and it feels like it's a watch that's going to last a long time and hold well up against those kind of other big battery powerhouses that you'll see from Garmin kind kind of and chorus particularly as well. Okay, so initial verdict on the Suunto Vertical, and I think there's a few ways to look at this. I do feel that we have to keep in mind this is kind of an outdoor kind of centric watch. Kind of running isn't its priority, but I think ultimately there's a lot of features for runners here. I think based on my kind of, you know, first runs with it and kind of first few days living with it, it does feel like the nicest Suunto I've used. But I also feel like there's some familiar Suunto traits which, until Suunto can kind of really shake, I'm not sure whether I would really be swapping this for something like the Chorus Vertix 2, you know, even like a Polar, maybe a Garmin as well. I think if you look at what you're getting comparisons to kind of Polar similar watches, I think obviously you're getting that mapping and you're getting that free mapping, and that is a good thing. And if that's something you care about, and you care about bigger battery life, and I think maybe getting that on paper better GPS performance or tracking performance, then the Vertical is going to get you that, but you're paying more money for it. If you look against it against similar price Garmin, so things in the Fenix range and, you know, at that price range basically, then I think the mapping support is more detailed on the Garmin watches. I think you're getting more battery life on paper on the Suunto Vertical compared to those Garmin watches in general, the kind of cheaper end models. But also I think the level of performance that I've seen on those Fenix watches in that price range, you know, obviously done a lot more testing with those, has kind of impressed me a bit more in general, and in terms of the insights that you're getting as well. If you look at something like the Chorus Vertix 2, I think this is a small, you know, a slimmer, more kind of manageable watch to wear. I think you're getting big battery like the Vertix 2 as well. You're getting that mapping support as well, which I think is probably a little bit on par. And it's a little bit easier to get, I would say, the mapping features onto the Suunto Vertical in comparison to the Vertix 2 as well. But again, it's, you know, are you getting enough over Vertix 2, which you can pick up for less if you don't go for the titanium version of the Suunto Vertical? Not 100% convinced. So at the moment I'm a little bit on the fence with the Vertical. I definitely want to see if that running performance or core running performance improves. I think the mapping is a good addition and it's well implemented, I think, on the Suunto Vertical, and I do think the battery life feels like it's going to be good, where if you care about tracking performance in that battery side of things, then I feel like it's going to deliver on that front. But is it the thing that's, or the watch that's going to really kind of change Suunto's fortunes? Possibly not, but I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it really just needs to work a little bit more on that software, whether that, and it's really kind of that software performance, pulling it all together, which you don't really have that issue with the other watches around this price, I don't think. And yeah, things like the kind of having that full mapping and dual frequency support, I think is really important here, along with all the kind of things you expect from a Suunto watch. But it's just, as a package, has it convinced me enough in those kind of first few days? I'm not sure, but I've seen things that I do like, and I do think you know, show promise for Suunto. But you know, longer term, will it convince me to pick it over something like a Fenix Epix, which is more expensive? Maybe a Vertix 2. I'm not convinced just yet, but it's the nicest Suunto I've used in a while, more so than the 9 Peak and the Peak Pro, and kind of Suunto's launches before that as well. So I think that is a good thing. Is it better than what's out there? I'm not 100% convinced just yet. Okay, so there you have it. Those are some initial running thoughts on the Suunto Vertical. Obviously, plenty more testing to do before we give you our full review. Now, if you've got any questions about the Vertical or any other watches that you want to get a sense of how it compares to, let us know in the comments. As always, like and subscribe, hit that little bell to find out about latest videos, and yeah, we'll see you in the next Run Testers video.